Good.
Well, our topic for today is activating talent and why employees getting to use their talent and gifts at work is so important. And in particular, the ways in which bosses can activate talent. And this really is tied to the conversation we had in our last episode, Alyssa, where we talked about the conditions that we need to create in order for people to thrive. And one of them that is critically important that we really didn't get into in the last episode was aligning people's talents, strengths, skills, and gifts to the job that they're in. We know that when people in the workplace get to use their talents and strengths at least 3 hours a day, not only is their engagement through the roof, but their overall health and well-being is better, right? When there's alignment between what I'm good at and what energizes me and how I spend my time during the workday, we reap all sorts of gifts out of that. How can bosses do a better job at activating the unique talents and strengths and gifts of the people in their charge in the workplace?
Well, that's a $1 million question, right? But I think that the entirety of just looking at that as something to begin with is
Right.
where to start, right? Because I feel like in society in general, we are prone to look at our deficits, our weaknesses, right? And so the performance evaluation systems that I've always encountered in the workplace are counterintuitive to playing to someone's strengths. You're focusing on what people need to improve, and there's not really a true recognition or a true opportunity to hone in on someone's strengths and talents. So I feel like being able to acknowledge that we traditionally have not had systems in which we are acknowledging and playing to people's strengths is the first step to activating an actual plan to then do so, right?
I am so glad you brought up performance reviews because the very construct of how we do performance management all year long with employees is sort of the opposite of what it should be, right? Let's spend all of our effort and energy attacking your weaknesses. Let's see if we could put forth a tremendous amount of effort to elevate you from not good enough in these areas to average.
Overall, right? Exactly.
Overall, instead of maybe saying, hey, look, there are like 3 or 4 things that are just perfect for you and that you're amazing at and that are clearly your sweet spot. So rather than spending considerable time and effort making you average, to get you to average in a handful of things, maybe I can tweak your role in such a way that 80% of your time is spent doing the handful of things that you're really good at. And now there are some folks who will hear that and who will interpret that as, well, then people should never have to do anything at work that they don't like or that they're not good at. And of course, that's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about proportionality in terms of the work. Have you ever had the opportunity to do that for someone as a leader, Alyssa, or have you ever been in a position where you got to play to your own strengths in the majority of your work time?
I think after I took my coursework at Duquesne for coaching, that's when I started to recognize this, because there is a textbook that we go over in that course, and I have it still up on my bookshelf up here. It's called Play to Your Strengths, right?
Right.
And that kind of changed my perception and my understanding of what the heck am I doing, like for myself and for my team. It is the continual focus of that negative, what you're not doing, what you could be better at, that we continually nitpick in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I did have the opportunity to start incorporating, after that knowledge, some actual ways in which I felt like I could better serve, and
Mm-hmm.
it served me and my purpose, connected me to a deeper purpose, for my work there. And I think that that's my ultimate wish as a leader, is that people saw me trying to do that for them,
Mm,
trying to help them grow and be the very best version of themselves authentically,
right.
um, in every capacity, not, not just like, oh, this bit of your life you're doing fine at, but then you got to like work on this. I really hope that people thought I genuinely cared about their purpose
Mm.
and their reason for showing up to work.
Because it's tied to what they're good at, right? Because they'll
Right.
feel fulfilled when they get to act
Meaning.
on,
Yeah.
right, the things that are naturally the right fit for them. In and amongst some of what you just said, I heard what are probably three things that leaders need to do. And we're getting ready to launch our Boss Better Leadership Academy here at Joe Mull and Associates. And
So
we're going to be,
exciting.
it's exciting. And we're going to be putting out a whole rich deck of content for folks all year long who are subscribers to the program. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about early on is the importance of aligning talent to role. And there are three things I think that leaders need to be constantly doing for the people that they supervise. Inquire, notice, and deploy. Those are going to be my three pieces of advice to our listeners. So the first is inquire. We need to be constantly talking to our employees and asking, inquiring, what do you like about your work? What really energizes you? What's the stuff you really enjoy doing? What do you feel like you're really good at? Like every job I ever had, I ended up being good at making things pretty on the computer. Whether it was designing a brochure or making a sign, I just had a knack for it. And it was never a part of my job description, but I ended up doing it everywhere, and I liked doing that sort of thing. And it was because of the second step, which was people noticed. As supervisors, we need to have dialogue. We need to ask about strengths and what energizes us and what people are good at, but we need to notice it too. And so we need to be, as much as possible, in the trenches with people and keeping an eye on where they seem to really shine. And when we notice it, we need to be explicit that we've noticed it. We need to say that we've noticed it. Hey, I noticed that you were really good at X. And there's a very good likelihood that most of the people who are listening to this podcast, who are leaders in one way or another, probably landed in the position because somebody noticed that they would potentially be good at it. Somebody maybe pulled them aside and said, hey, have you ever thought about applying for a management position? And so somebody noticed an affinity or a talent or some gifts. And then the third thing is deploy. Once you notice a talent or once you have a dialogue about it, how can you deploy that person to use that talent more often at work? So if you have somebody who's really great at diffusing angry customers on the phone, asking them to do a little primer walkthrough of how to do that well with other people on the team is a way to activate their talent. Have them lead a meeting on the subject. Asking people, okay, you said you really like making things pretty on the computer, Joe, and yeah, you definitely have a knack for that. We've got some projects coming up. Would you like to be on one of the committees? That's a way to activate talent. So having that dialogue, asking those questions, noticing those things, and deploying people to use that talent is the sort of the tactical way to do it from the perspective of being a great boss.
I love everything you just said because it so thoroughly aligns with some of the internal coaching processes that I try to develop in clients, so when you inquire, you're getting curious, you're asking
Mm-hmm.
questions, right? And so we're trying to create that self curiosity. Oh, what's that about? Oh, wonder why I feel that way, or whatever it might be, right? The noticing
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely noticing. And then the key thing for me is, um, that plays into this whole to your strengths, is the ability to notice without negative judgment. of
Right.
others and of yourself in the internal coaching process. So then deploying is, the action, how
Yeah.
all this internal process, how it flows out of you, right? So those are really astute tactical strategies that leaders can use to help their teams in a
Yeah.
real tangible way.
And I think we have to remember that there's kind of a, this sounds really ominous and it's not meant to, but there's a dark side to not getting to use your talent at work, right?
Mm.
If you are doing work that requires no thought, no effort, no time, that doesn't fit with your gifts, we get bored. We get
Yep.
complacent. You know, I remember for years, you and I worked together at a large healthcare system, a large academic healthcare system. We won't name them. Let's just call them the mothership. We worked for years at the mothership, which still have a lot of friends there, and
Mm-hmm.
they do a lot of incredible work. And by working at a very large and prominent in the community health center, I don't know if you had this experience a lot, but I did. People would say to me all the time, "Hey, I'm going to apply at the mothership.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm applying for this front desk position." And now I would have this conversation with people who had master's degrees and 10 years of experience, and this position was paying $12 an hour, and they were so clearly overqualified. And I would say, "Well, why are you applying for that position?" And they would say, "I just want to get my foot in the door." I
Yep.
mean, yes, the number of times I heard that phrase. And I would have to have an uncomfortable conversation, which is, I'm not going to go to my employer and recommend you for a job that you've already said you're going to leave as fast as possible
Mm-hmm.
and that you are overqualified for, because you're going to be bored, and bored people do a couple of damaging things, right? They look for problems that don't exist. They
Mm-hmm.
don't bond themselves to the team, especially if you've got one foot in the door there, but you've got one foot out the door to the next opportunity that you're scanning the job openings for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we have people in the right roles, when people are in the right fit, both in terms of where they want to be professionally in their career and with their talent, we become so engaged with the work that we don't have time to get caught up in all that other BS that could potentially distract us. Did you ever have that experience, the whole foot in the door conversation?
Oh, I started my career at that said place as a recruiter.
Oh,
And
that's
one
right.
of the ways in which we, scanned through applications and resumes, one of the, rejection codes is overqualified. So absolutely. Like, you know, apply for what plays to your strengths and know that that's the kind of position and organization that you want to say yes to, because they are looking to your strengths to
Yes.
make them stronger
Yes.
ultimately.
Yes. And let's make sure we don't bury the headline here, though, for our boss heroes that are listening. Um, this is not a conversation about rejecting people who don't come to you with strengths. This is about looking at the people who are there right now and
Yes.
saying, what are your gifts? What are your strengths? And how do I position you to use those more often in your day-to-day work? You mentioned Play to Your Strengths, the book.
Yeah.
There's another great resource out there. A lot of folks are probably familiar with it. It's the Strengths Finders book. It's Clifton's Strengths Finders. We'll link to both of these books on the podcast webpage in the episode transcript if you want to go looking for them. But in Strengths Finders, they move people through a process to evaluate what some of their innate strengths are. And there's a great story that I think it's from that book. I may be crediting this incorrectly, but I think I encountered it in Clifton's Strengths Finders. And it's a story that's attributed to Mark Twain about a man who dies and goes to heaven, and he meets St. Peter at the pearly gates, and he starts asking St. Peter all the things that he wanted answers to when he was alive on earth. And at one point he says to St. Peter, "I was a big student of military history. Tell me, St. Peter, who was the greatest general who ever lived?" And St. Peter says, "Oh, that's easy. He's standing right over there." And our guy looks, and then he says, "Well, hold on, St. Peter. That can't be right. For I knew that man when I was alive on earth, and he was but a common day laborer." And St. Peter responds by saying, yes, that's right. And he would have been the greatest general who ever lived if he had been a general. We have folks who have strengths that we're not using. We have folks who are in the wrong roles. We have folks who have the potential to be great, but nobody has asked or noticed yet. And I think that's a huge piece of what we have to do as bosses.
Wow, that's a beautiful story. I haven't heard that. It also reminds me that of all the times in which we have the opportunity to ensure that we are playing to people's strengths is after everyone's workplace, physically, most probably, but definitely in terms of the dynamic of your workplace has shifted, changed, morphed, modified 1,000 times over in the last year and a
Yeah.
half. Now's the time to come back because their folks have changed. And so we need to meet them where they're at. Maybe their strengths have morphed, changed. Maybe what they're passionate about needs to be realigned and can be better serving the organization, better serving them.
Yeah.
Now's the
Yeah.
time.
Well said. And that's a perfect bow on that conversation. So, listeners, how are you activating talent? What conversations are you having? What actions are you taking? Or what questions or activities are you using to notice talent and connect it with the work? We'd love for you to tell us about that. You can email the show at bossbetternow@gmail.com. You can leave a comment on the podcast Facebook page, or if you're streaming this episode online, well, then just pop a comment in the box below. We read those all the time.